Okay, we're on Mishnah and we're on the Gemara. I involve in base.
Page, what page number?
76b. Gemara. About 12 lines on top of the bottom, from the bottom of the page. Okay. Okay, first scenario in the Mishnah is the guy says, if I don't, 1 second. Yeah. Yeah, the first scenario in the Mishnah, the guy says this should be a divorce if I don't come back in 12 months. Now, and he doesn't show up within 12 months. Just one problem. The reason why he didn't show up is because he was dead. He died. And he's dead. A dead person can't give a divorce. If he was alive, so the divorce is valid at the conclusion of the 12-month period. If he's dead, he's dead. He can't give a divorce. The divorce is not valid unless he says me'achshav from the date that he gave it. If it doesn't return within 12 months. And then if he doesn't return because he dies, the divorce is valid. Now, the Gemara says, Tana, Rabbi the rabbis permitted her to remarry. They disagree with the Mishnah. The Mishnah says it's not a divorce because he didn't say me'achshav. The rabbis say no, they disagree. The rabbis disagree. Who are these rabbis that disagree? It's the court that permitted the oil of the non-Jews. This court was led by a fellow whose name was Rabbi Yehudah Hanasi. However, he was not the Rabbi Yehudah Hanasi who wrote the Mishnah. He's an Amora. He's a later generation. He's called Rabbi Yehudah Nesiah, and opposed to Rabbi Yehudah Hanasi, probably because he lived in Bavel. And he's, I believe, a grandson or a great grandson of the great famous author of the Mishnayos, who's known as Rabbi Yehudah Hanasi.
Rabbi, have we already started the Mishnah yet, or are you still?
I'm reading the Gemara. The Mishnah we saw yesterday.
Okay, so
the Mishnah said that if somebody says, here's a divorce, what if I don't come back within 12 months? And he didn't show up because he was dead. The Mishnah says it's not a good divorce unless he said me'achshav. Now, from now, the divorce is valid now at the moment I give it if I don't return. The Gemara says that somebody disagrees. The Rabbi Seinu disagree. I'm reading Rabbi Seinu, it's the court that permitted the oil of the non-Jews. Savri like Rabbi Yossi, they hold like Rabbi Yossi. The Amar is manish shtar mechiach. That the date in the shtar, the date in the document proves regarding the document. What does it prove? It proves that he intended to say me'achshav. Why do you write a date in a document? The reason why you write a date is because you want the transaction to be in effect immediately. Savri like Rabbi Yossi, they go with the opinion of Rabbi Yossi. To Amar is manish shtar mechiach alav. It says the date of the shtar proves that he meant to say me'achshav. Okay, Amar Baba Breder of Chia Barabba, Amar Bechanan. So Rabbi, the son of Rabbi Chia Barabba, says the name of Rabbi Yechanan, Rabbi Yehudah Nesiah. This is Rabbi Yehudah Nesiah, who is B'nai Shargamliel bar Rebbe, who's the grandson of the famous Rabbi Yehudah Hanasi, who authored the Mishnayos. Hira, this is how he ruled. Okay, but they didn't agree to him either. Kol siyatei. The simple explanation of that means the entire court, his Talmud, his students that were there present when the question came up, they did not agree to this. And some say for his entire life, nobody agreed with him. So he's sort of a single opinion. Okay. It's a very interesting question here. Rabbi Elazar asks this old person, who the Husava is in general. When that Husava shows up in the story times, that Husava is usually a reference to Eliyahu and Avi. If it's a reference here or not, I don't know. Okay, this is a very good question. When a guy says, I'm giving you a divorce now if I don't return within 12 months. And sure enough, the guy dies in the middle. Can she remarry immediately? Or does she have to wait 12 months? He'll never be able to come back at the end of 12 months. He's dead. Mm-hmm. Is he permitted to marry now, or is she permitted to remarry, or does she have to wait 12 months? Now, remember, this question is true according to Rebbe. It's according to this Rabbi Yehudah Nasiya, who's not the famous Rebbe. This question would also be true if he didn't say Me'achshav, because effectively it's the same thing. Okay, La'alto Shurisu, you permit her immediately to Holayasi, because there's no way he's coming back. Quite literally, right? Or do you have to wait 12 months because that's the fulfillment of the condition? So the Gemara says, why is he asking the question just according to Rebbe? He can ask the question of the Mishnah too. I'm giving you a divorce today if I don't come back within 12 months. And he dies within that 12-month period. The divorce is valid. And the question would be, is it again immediately because he'll never come back? Or is the divorce after 12 months because that's when you fulfill the condition that you wouldn't come back within the 12-month period?
But in any event, she should be able to remarry because regardless of when the get takes effect, when he dies, she can remarry because she would be a widow otherwise.
Yeah, so talking about where she would have been in a state of Yibam. That's sort of why he was giving her a divorce in the first place, sort of to avoid that problem. We'll see. We'll get to a story in a few minutes. There's a more extreme case of exactly that situation where he had to give a divorce because if you remember the story of Ashmedai, there was a guy who got married with the only brother was a young kid, not a young kid, a newborn. Newborn. He would have to wait 13 years to do Yibam or Chalitza. Okay. Or do we say it's after 12 months because after 12 months when you fulfill the condition? So Gemara says you're right. You could have asked the same question on the Mishnah. Because he happened to have been present when this question came in front of Rabbi Yehudah Nasiya's desk. So therefore he asked the question on Rabbi Yehudah Nasiya. We're in the last line. 76b. Second word. Amar Abaya. Okay, let's say he basically says to her, this should be divorced in the morning. So what he says is when the sun comes out of its closet, so to speak. Sheath. Okay, so what does that mean? He means when the sun comes out. If he dies at night, it's a divorce. I'm sorry. The divorce happened after he dies the next morning. If he says on condition the sun comes out in the morning, then obviously that means it means that divorce is valid now when the sun comes up. The Amr of Amarav called anyone who says Almanas says if he's saying I want it to happen now if this condition is fulfilled. The debate is if so again. There's three categories here. Almanas shetetze, on condition the sun comes up. Likish shetetze, when the sun comes up. Or imtetze, if it will come up. So it's when, if, and on condition. On condition means now. Now on condition. When it happens means when it happens. Nothing happens until that event occurs. Now the question is if it happens. Is if the same as on condition? Is im the same as almanas or not? That's the debate between Rabbi Yossi and the Rabban. Marasavar Lokar Rabbi Yossi. The Amar is manish shashtavich yechol v'havalik k'meyayim imesi. One opinion goes with Rabbi Yossi that says that the date of the document improves. He meant to say me'achshav, from now if the sun comes out. And Marasavar. I'm sorry, and one opinion disagrees with Rabbi Yossi and says that imesi, if I die, is not the same as saying almanas on condition that I die. Imesi is much more like if I die is much more like saying when I die. So in other words, the Mishnah we just saw, the Mishnah basically says, if you say me'achshav, if you say from now, or alternatively, if you say almanas, which effectively means now, that's fine. Otherwise, if you say if or when, they're the same thing. If means when, which effectively means it's not a condition really. You're delaying the event, the execution of the document until when the event occurs. That's when it happens, not at the moment, and the condition is sort of a separate component that's fulfilled at a later time. What happened was he told them, write a divorce. If I don't come back with it, I'm sorry. Two statements in the Mishnah. Just careful not to stumble over myself here. If I don't come back within 12 months, write and give a divorce to my wife. Is what is one option. Or if he says, write and give a divorce to my wife if I don't come back within 12 months. In the second scenario, where first he says write and give, then we, according to Rabbi Yossi, we say if they ended up writing the divorce during the 12-month period, it's still kosher. Because when he says first, write and give a divorce to my wife if I don't come back within 12 months, what he means to say, write it within the 12 months and give it after the 12 months. But if he reverses the statement, meaning first he says, if I don't come back within 12 months, then he says, write and give a divorce to my wife, then he means do it afterwards, according to all opinions. Together? Amar Rav Yemer Ravashi. Rav Yemer says to Ravashi, "Le'emi kasav Rabbi Yossi kasav get al t'nai kosher." According to Rabbi Yossi says that he can write the divorce during the 12-month period and then give the divorce after the end of the 12 months. Presumably, that's because if the husband instructs the divorce to be written with the condition, then you can still write the divorce on condition. This is not giving the divorce condition, this is writing it on condition. Somewhere says, not necessarily. If you write a divorce on condition, the divorce document is invalid. Rabbi Yossi doesn't mean to say that you can write the divorce on condition, even though it's still not 12 months. Rabbi Yossi says no. When you say write and give a divorce if I don't come back within 12 months, it means to say what he actually meant to say was write it during the 12 months, give it at the end of the 12 months. So actually, the divorce isn't written on condition at all. If I don't come back, write and give. And it's not what he said. He said, write and give if I don't come back. This is what he means to say. Write it in the 12 months, and give it after 12 months. So sort of he cuts up the statement. The guy says as follows: write, period, and give the get if I don't come back in 12 months. Where the rabbi said there's no period. So it's write and give if I don't come back within 12 months. So you take the if I don't come back within 12 months and you put the write and give after that statement. Whereas according to Rabbi Yossi, it's two separate things. First, write the divorce immediately. And then he said, give if I don't come back within 12 months. You together? So this, according to this opinion, this is nothing to do with writing a divorce on condition. The rabbis don't differentiate whether you said write and give if I don't come back within 12 months, or if I don't come back within 12 months, write and give it. According to the rabbis, it's the same thing. Okay, 1 second. Now, in all these scenarios where a guy says, write a divorce if I don't come back within this period, sort of what's the grace period, or what exactly does a year mean? So explain. If a guy says, if I don't come back within a Shemitah, within a 7-year cycle, you have to wait an extra year. The 8th year is also considered part of the Shemitah cycle. If the guy says Shana 1 year, then Chodesh, it's a month. And this is because the 13th month is sort of counted as part of the, it's 12 months have passed. So it's still considered within the year.
If the person died, you don't know when they died. So in a way, you're writing the get after the person died. Seems like
Okay, so in this scenario, it would be where the person Doesn't make a difference here. Over here, a guy's saying, if I don't come back within 12 months, doesn't necessarily mean he's not coming back because he's dead. It could be he's not coming back because
It's just not coming back.
exactly marriage is too difficult.
Okay.
Now, if he dies, then the giving of divorce won't be valid. Everything will be invalid. So yeah, the document won't be valid because it has to be given anyway after 12 months, which we'll actually see now is 13 months, right?
Yes.
I shouldn't say that. Take that back.
Oh,
12 months is 12 months. A year is 13 months. That's the difference. A year, because a year, the last month, like January is part of the year, so to speak. Similarly, the 8th year of Shemitah, which I believe is we're still in the 8th year of Shemitah, then year after Shemitah is also considered part of the Shemitah cycle. Okay, if a guy says La'achar Chodesh, if he says after a month, then you give him Shabbos, an extra week. What if he says La'achar Shabbos after a week? What's the story? Yosef Rav Zera Kamed Rav Asi. Rav Zera was in front of Rav Asi. The Amri Law, Rav Asi Kamed Rav Yechanan. Some says Rav Asi in front of Rav Yechanan. The Ka'amar, and he said Chad b'Shabo Utrei Utilsa Bos Utrei Utilsa Bosa Shabsa. So it's Sunday, Monday, Tuesday is sort of connected to the previous week's Shabbos. So Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Kami Shabsa. That's part of the next week's Shabbos. So if you get, the guy said, if I don't come back within a week, within a Shabbos, he means to say up until Wednesday the next week. Tanya Rebbe Aimer la'achar regal shloshim yom. Because if I don't come back after the holiday, you give him 30 days. Nofik Rav Chia darsha mishmei de Rabbi v'kol sua. So Rav Chia went and taught everybody in the study hall this halacha that if the guy says if I don't come back after Sukkot, we give him an extra month. And he said this is I heard in the name of Rebbe, the name of an individual. Because Sua, and they said, oh, it's very good that you're saying it's an individual because the halacha does not follow him. Then he said Mishmei de Rab, and then he said in the name of lots of rabbis, implying that the halacha should be that way, and they did not appreciate that. Alma less helpful say because the halacha does not follow the opinion of Rebbe, and if a guy says after the holiday, you don't give an extra month. Hadron Aloch Misha Ochsu, and this concludes the parak of the fellow who was possessed by the Kerdaikas. Now we get to the next parak. Talks a lot about kinyanim. That's acquiring the divorce. And we'll see a lot about different kinyanim, an active acquisition, but we'll see more details. Hazarek get le'ishtay. Somebody throws a divorce to his wife. V'hi b'seich beisa, she's inside of her house. Or in her courtyard. The divorce is valid. The reason for this is called kinyan chotzer. Kinyan chotzer means that if your property is watched, so for example, if a guy, the mailman comes, right, and he puts in or someone puts in an envelope into your what's called the crack in the door.
The mail slot?
The mail slot
Okay.
in the door. So once it's in the mail slot, there's no way getting it. It's secured now, right? So if a thief comes and steals your house and pulls out all the envelopes that you got, and let's say some of these envelopes you didn't actually ask for. So somebody, gives you a free coupon in the mail. He's a thief. He can't steal a coupon because you acquired the coupon by somebody putting it in a secure domain. Secured house, secured, it's yours. The same thing is true, by the way, if a person has a bird that comes into his backyard, a secured backyard, it's closed off, and it lays a bunch of eggs. The eggs belong to you. Can't do shiluch hakan, by the way, if the eggs belong to you. If you want to be able to do shiluch hakan, a person should say at some point in his life that he never wants to acquire any of the eggs laid in his backyard, and then they're not his, because if you don't want to acquire them, you don't acquire them. But otherwise, if a bird lays eggs in your backyard, the eggs belong to you. They're secured. If you don't do anything and the eggs hatch and turn into chicks and the chicks turn into birds and they fly away, it's no longer secured. It's not yours anymore. Okay. So if he throws the divorce into her mail slot, Harezim Garashis, the divorce is valid. Let's say she was in his house, in his courtyard. Even if, let's say, the divorce falls onto her bed, and she's not divorced unless it actually gets to her. If she's sitting in his house and the divorce goes into her, her bosom, or or her basket,
Oh.
sort of immediately on her possession, then I raise that then the divorce is valid, and we'll see why. Okay, how do we know the divorce doesn't actually have to get to her hands? Getting to her courtyard is sufficient as long as the courtyard is watched. We know immediately. How do we know this? The Tanur Rabbanan, because the rabbis taught v'nosan yada, give it in her hands. Only el yada, gaga chatzer kafifa minayin. How do you know if it falls onto her roof, onto her courtyard, or her karfif? A karfif is an enclosed area. Let's say a corral for the animals would be an example of a karfif. Talmud Leimer v'nosan mikol makam. Any type of giving is sufficient. It doesn't require yada, her hands. Anything that's similar to her hand is sufficient. Is a sufficient way to give a divorce. Tanya Nabi Hachem, we learned this well in a brisa. Gabeganev, but with regard to a thief. A thief, let's say a thief is a thief steals something and brings it into his own domain. So he has to pay back double payments. This is only if he steals it in his hand. If he steals it by, let's say, pushing it into his courtyard or something like that. Any place where the thief has it in his domain, he's a thief. The Torah needs to repeat this law with regard to divorce and with regard to a thief. Yes, meaning get, because if the Torah would have only told you that a get can also be given in her courtyard, because a man can divorce his wife against her will. And therefore it makes sense to have a more inclusive category of so to speak, her hand, her domain. Because you can force her to accept divorce anyway. So why can't you force her by dumping it into her house? But you can't steal against your will. It's not somebody forces you to steal. That's not called stealing. Amalai, maybe it wouldn't be sufficient to have it come into the thief's courtyard. It would have to be that he takes it with his hands. If I would have just known the laws of a thief, in other words, the reason why the Torah gives an expansive definition of where a thief, how a thief could acquire a stolen object, that's because the Torah is trying to penalize him, trying to require him to make the double payment. So it has a very expansive category. Aval get, but with regard to a divorce, a malay. Say 7 o'clock. Right?
Yeah.
Okay, so in other words, the Torah wants to penalize him. That's why we give an expansive definition. Aval get, a malay. But maybe with regard to a divorce, you have to actually give it in her hands. So therefore, the Torah needs to say in both instances that actually there's an expansive definition. A hand doesn't mean a hand. It means any secured component of your domain. Okay. Gmara has here a technical problem, and this will sort of carry us through the rest of the day. A woman, it's her courtyard, right? He puts divorce in her courtyard, but hold on a second. If a woman finds $1 million in a wallet on the street corner, what's the halacha? Goes to the husband. Why is that? Because the husband has an obligation to redeem her, right? Mitzi also tachas per kaina, and therefore we say that if there's a sudden windfall of money, the husband gets to keep it. So, in general, if this is sort of a broader question, which the Gemara will address maybe on a more fundamental level. For now, the question is, even if it's her courtyard, but if $1 million fell into her courtyard, who gets it? The husband. So if a divorce falls into her courtyard, the husband also gets it. How do you give it to her? Now, if you take the question to the logical extent, what's the logical extension of this question?
There's never a get.
How do you ever give a divorce? How do you ever get a divorce? We'll get to that in a moment. Every divorce is the woman acquires it on behalf of her husband. How do you ever divorce a woman? We'll get to that. We have the same problem, by the way, with regard to a man freeing himself, a slave acquiring his freedom. How does he acquire his freedom? Whatever he acquires belongs to his master. So how could he ever acquire his freedom? We'll get to it. Okay. Omer Belosar, but 8 lines in the bottom of the page. Because of law, so it's talking as follows. We're talking about a property that's nechsim melug, a property that she brought in. She owned this house before she got married. Then they got married. And he wrote to her that I'm not taking any rent from this house. It stays yours, it's nothing to do with me. They wrote what's called a prenup, right? Prenup. There's nothing wrong with writing a prenup. You're welcome to write it. Anyone wants to write a prenup. And obviously, question is whether it's actually worth writing a prenup. It does. They call it a romance killer or something like that. But if someone wants to write a prenup and change the typical arrangements of marriage, he's welcome to do so, as long as they're not the basic obligations. Any sort of financial arrangement, they can have any custom financial arrangement. So that's what they did. They had a custom financial arrangement. He is not going to touch her assets. Okay, so the Gemara says, so the Gemara presumes that he wrote this to her once they got married. The Gemara says, hold on a second. Once they got married, it's too late to write it. You already got it. How can you write, I don't want to have it? We learned, the guy owns the field and he says, I want to have nothing to do with it. It's tough luck. You own the field. You can't decide not to have anything to do with it. So if the fellow already has rights to his wife's property, he can't just dispose of those rights. We're talking about where he wrote it before they got married. He wrote a prenup, basically. Like the opinion of Rav Kahana, like the opinion of Rav Kahana. Rav Kahana, if a person has property that's coming to him, but it doesn't yet belong to him, he can write that he doesn't want to receive it. Like the opinion of Rava, if the rabbis enacted this decree that we presume a woman's assets she brings into the marriage remain with her. The husband gets the benefit of those assets while they're married. But if the husband doesn't want that benefit, then he's free to remove himself from it. What's the example that Rava gave? Rava says kigoyinzu, like this example. What's the kigoyinzu? What's the example? Which is, in other words, our Gemara is talking about nefsim melug, assets she brought into her marriage. But there's another example that Rava was talking about. What was Rava's example? Says in the name of Rav. A woman could tell her husband, I don't want you to support me, but I want to keep my income. The reason why a woman's income goes to her husband is because the rabbis insisted that the husband be obligated to support his wife, whether or not she makes enough money. However, if she makes enough money she doesn't want, then she can say, I'd rather keep my money and you don't have to support me. Rava says, okay. So Rava offers a different explanation. Rava asks this question. The obvious question is, how does a woman ever acquire a divorce, even in her hands? Whatever's in her hands belongs to her husband. So how could she ever acquire a divorce? It must be that her ability to acquire something comes along with her divorce. Since post-divorce she can acquire anything because she's divorced, right? Women have equal property rights under Jewish law. We never had any of that, British common law where somehow women couldn't own property. Women could always own property. It's just when they're married, the presumption is it goes to her husband unless they decide otherwise. So if that's the case, then her ability to acquire things, which is any woman is able to acquire something, comes together with the divorce. If that's the case, then the logic applies similarly when you put the divorce into the chutzner, into the courtyard. So Ravina says to Ravashi, there's no comparison. I'm sorry. Rava yad ishka kashlei. He says to her, Rava has this difficulty. How does a woman ever acquire a divorce, even in her hands? He says, hold on a second. There's a simple resolution. The hand is different. Why? Okay, this is a very sharp contrast here. He's saying, hold on a second. Let's understand this. A husband doesn't own his wife. He has certain privileges that he's acquired from her, but he doesn't own the goof of his wife. His wife is not like a slave. in that sense. So when everything that she acquires belongs to him, that means that he doesn't own her hands. He owns whatever she acquires. However, presumably that would exclude a divorce. Logically, that type of acquisition, the rabbis presumably never transferred from the woman to the husband, because ultimately she still owns herself. The husband doesn't own her. You don't have a kinyan haguf. He doesn't own the person. So Rashi explains that you're right. It could be that with regard to giving a divorce in the hand, it's not that difficult. But Amalei Ravi got ha'eved kakashleis. What about a slave? The man da Amar b'shtarai de atzma yad eved kiad rabbi damya. How can you give a divorce, a document freeing a slave into the slave's hand? You actually do own the slave's hands. You do have actual ownership over the slave, and therefore, how does a slave acquire his freedom? Ella must be gita v'yadim b'an. His emancipation, along with his ability to acquire, come at the same time. Once I know that concept exists, I can apply it to a woman acquiring a divorce in her courtyard. Finish with the story. There was this deathly ill person. He had a divorce written to his wife, an Erev Shabbos. Obviously, there was a situation of Yibum here, that they were trying to avoid Yibum. Now, we'll go with Rashi's pshat. It's interesting. Taisus quotes a Rashi. I could not find the Rashi in our text. So I guess it's very likely that it is certainly the case that Taisus had more Rashi than we have today. There were other booklets of Rashi that never ended up, making it through the generations. But Rashi explains that a divorce should not be transferred directly on Shabbos. So Rava has a shtick here. What's the shtick? But he didn't have a chance to give it to her till the next day. Then on Shabbos, he's about to die. Also, they went in front of Rava. They needed a solution. They needed to give the guy to give the get on Shabbos. So he said to them, Zilu Amrulei. What they should do is they should tell the husband to transfer the room that the divorce is in to the wife. And she should go ahead and she should acquire that room with chazaka. By, for example, opening and locking the door. The time we learned, no gadol parts. If he locked the door or he built a fence or he broke it through a fence, kolshu, even a small amount, to raise a chazaka, that's an act of chazaka which acquires property. And this way, by acquiring the property, you acquire everything in it, including the divorce. How exactly is this going to work? Whatever the woman acquires, her husband acquires. So how can she acquire the property? He was embarrassed for a second. And remember, Rava is the one who says, Gita v'yadei b'an k'echad. So why was he embarrassed? We'll get to it. Rav is the one who says that acquiring the divorce comes at the same moment that she gets the ability to acquire. So then there wouldn't be any problem. Who cares if she can't acquire the property? Because if by acquiring the property she acquires the documents, so it's gita v'yadei b'an k'echad. They come at the same time. We'll get to that in a moment. That answer actually Rava said at the end of this story. This story happened before Rava had that idea. So at that moment, if he was embarrassed for a moment, they weren't even married. She was an oros. They were betrothed. So they didn't actually. And Rava says, if you want to make this claim by nesua, then you could say, well, the woman can't acquire anything. But if she's an arusa, she's not yet married yet, then she could acquire things. So therefore, it's not a question. Then Rava says, something, it doesn't even make a difference. They all come at the same time. Didn't Rava already say Gemara says no. Rava said it about this story. This is the story where Rava says the hand and the divorce and the ability to acquire come at the same moment, and therefore you can't tell me how could the woman acquire it, whatever the woman owns, her husband owns, because when she's acquiring a divorce, we don't say that rule. They come at the same moment. Okay. Stop here. Have a great day.
You got a great one.